Joining us here on 9 News Watch. I'm Chris Bianchi, and we're continuing with our daily coverage here on 9 News Watch of the Alex Ewing trial. Now, this is in the case of the 1984 gruesome murders of Deborah and Bruce Bennett and their 7-year-old daughter, Melissa. Their 30-year-old daughter, Vanessa, was critically injured in the same attack. It was believed to have been conducted by Hammer. Alex Ewing charged with those murders, and now the case has gone to trial. And joining us for a recap and for a look back on what we saw also back on Wednesday, 90 Wants to Know reporter Kevin Vaughn is along with the Director of Investigative Reporting, Nicole Vapp. Join us now for a look at what we've seen over the last little while. And Kevin, I want to start things off with you, what we saw both on Wednesday and Thursday in court.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Today began with testimony of a woman named Sherry Letton. Her mother was murdered in Lakewood a week before the Bennetts. Alex Ewing is also charged in that case, and it's scheduled to go to trial in October. Normally, in a case like this, in the trial of Alex Ewing in the separate case, the Bennett family murders, juries are not allowed to learn about other things involved in the suspect. However, the judge made an exception in this case. They're allowed to hear about the murder a week earlier of Patricia Smith, to help them identify Alex Ewing, to consider the similar, modus operandi, and to rebut any claim by the defense that the DNA match in the two cases is by accident or by some mix up in a lab or something like that. So Sherry took the stand this morning and told the story of essentially coming home and finding her mother's body on January 10th, 1984, which was 6 days before the Bennett murders.
I bet that was really emotional for her. She was a young mother when that murder happened. She, like you said, walked in and found her mother's body. It was brutal, and so I bet she had an emotional time today. It's been 37 years.
Yeah, exactly. She did, and the case is so similar to the Bennetts. Her mother was sexually assaulted. Her mother was killed with a hammer. Her body was left in sort of the exact same condition as little Melissa Bennett's body was left, partially clothed with a blanket over her head. And so I think, one of the things that was baffling to us in the last few years is that Patricia Smith's murder got very little attention in the news media back in 1984, even after the Bennett murders and what appeared to be the obvious connections between them. It really wasn't until about 2010 when DNA showed that the same person likely committed both crimes that they started to get mentioned in the same sentence with each other. So for Sherry today to tell that story, and it was emotional for her, and it was hard, and there was a really quiet moment sort of in the back of the courtroom at the end of it. After Sherry had discovered her mother, she ran next door. She was living in a townhome at the time. She had run next door and asked the neighbor to come check on her mother, and the neighbor went and confirmed that her mother was dead, and came back and called the police and so forth. And that neighbor is no longer living, but his daughter, who was just a small child when this happened and has memories of it, came to court today to support Sherry. And so as Sherry was leaving the courtroom, this woman was there to give her a hug, and they shared a private moment in the back of the courtroom before leaving. So that was certainly the emotional power of today. A lot of today's testimony had to do with the collection of evidence. Again, the police are building the case about how all of this evidence fits together. And the last several hours was all about how some of this evidence was tested back in 1984. Of course, then there was no DNA testing. It was all about trying to find blood types, using, at the time, what seemed like cutting edge technology that seems very antiquated in this day and age, when we can get DNA now from just a few skin cells. So that's sort of the highlights of what went on today.
I'm curious, Kevin, when Sherry was testifying about the horrific scene that she saw when she came home that day, was there any kind of acknowledgement or any kind of emotion on the face of the defendant in this case?
I have not seen any sort of visible reaction to him. He sits with his back to the seating area where I sit, and I sort of see him from the side and kind of behind. I've seen him taking a lot of notes. I've seen him staring ahead intently. I could not tell if he had any reaction to what she was saying. One of the interesting things is I think the prosecution was trying to sort of get ahead of the idea that maybe Patricia Smith had some sort of consensual relationship with Alex Ewing, which of course could explain the DNA. So the last few questions that Sherry was asked was, is this someone you recognize? Is this someone that was a friend of your mother's? Is this someone that had permission to be in your mother's home? And she gave the same answer every time. Absolutely not, absolutely not, absolutely not. So I think they were trying to rebut any kind of suggestion that could be made later on that her mother and Alex Smith had some kind of a relationship with each other.
So yesterday they showed a video of the scene, and Connie was there. Connie Bennett was there. She's the one who discovered the bodies in her case, her son, and she did not watch the video, but did she show any kind of visible reaction today if she was there? I know she was going to try to be there every day, to what she was hearing someone else say their experience was in a very similar thing.
Yeah, Connie is. I talked to her outside court for a couple of minutes. She said, it was a long day, but she's been there for everything. She, I know, was touched by what Sherry had to say and what her experience has been. But Connie, as you know, is a very strong person, and it's not to say that she doesn't get emotional. We've seen her get emotional at times. She got emotional on the witness stand the other day, but she's also very very tough and very controlled most of the time. And I think that's sort of been her game face in the courtroom. She's not, she's got a seat in the front row. She's got a victim's advocate with her. Today she had three of her children with her for much of the day, including a daughter who came in from out of state to be with her. So she's got a good support system around her. But I know, the video that we saw yesterday in particular was really hard. She was not able to see it from where she sat, and I don't think she would have wanted to see it if she'd had the opportunity.
So, it just must be surreal for her and for Sherry and for all their families. And they're hearing it all again and hearing some of the evidence, which, I'm sure intellectually they knew existed, or maybe they were told a long time ago, but probably haven't thought of in a long time. And so there's just a lot. And like you said yesterday, hearing the video was strange. They took the audio out, but tell us a little bit more about what that was like.
Yeah, this was yesterday. The prosecution got permission from the judge to play a video of the crime scene at the Bennett home that was filmed, on January 16th, 1984, the day that Connie Bennett went to the house because no one could reach her son and daughter-in-law, and they hadn't shown up for work, and found this, terrible, terrible scene. And the video was it started with the front of this house that we've seen in our old footage, all these years inside the house, room, and saw, Bruce Bennett and Deborah Bennett and Melissa Bennett as they were found, and all of the, all the stuff you'd see in a crime scene. I mean, this was it's hard to overstate, but the word horrific doesn't seem big enough in some ways. And that video was 20 minutes long, and it was played for the jury, and was actually played on TV, brought in just for the jury. It was not played on the normal screens in the courtroom, so most of the people in the room could not see it. And Connie was one of those. She was sitting, her normal seat was in a place where she would have had to move to see the television. She did not do that. She just sort of sat quietly while that played in this silent courtroom, with the only sound being sort of the hum of the audio system in the courtroom when nobody's talking. That was all you could really hear. Maybe a shuffle of papers a couple of times and a couple of sniffles and coughs, but that was about it.
Well, that was probably on purpose because the day before they saw some photographs of it. And I can't imagine that's a whole lot to take in.
Yeah, there have been a number of photographs of the victims that have been shown to the jury and shown in the courtroom, and a photo and the video sort of in the Bennett case tied all of those together. Sherry this morning had to, sit through the display of a photo of how she found her mother, and that could not have been easy. The judge, the judge has some discretion. So there are some photographs that have not been allowed, but the jury has seen a lot of what happened in the Bennett case, certainly, and now they've seen some of what happened in the Smith case, even though they really can only consider that case for a limited purpose. In fact, the jury's not even going to be told where that stands. For all they know, Alex Ewing might have already been convicted of that case, or might already be in prison for that case. They're just is all accused of that case.
Is there anything on the agenda for tomorrow that we can expect to see?
So the last couple of hours today was a forensic scientist that did a lot of testing of evidence back in 1984, and she was still on the witness stand when 5 o'clock rolled around. And the judge asked the lawyers to come up and I think wanted to know how much longer this was going to take, because if it would have been 10 or 15 minutes, he would have kept court going. But he said that he expected at least another hour of testimony from her. So that's how the day is going to start. She'll be on the stand. But, her primary role in this was back in the 1980s. A number of other families done testing on this evidence. So it would seem to me that that's the most likely scenario tomorrow.
Great.
All right, well, Kevin and Nicole, we certainly appreciate both of your insight on this. As you mentioned, they're horrific, maybe understating this this whole case and this whole and the murder, of course. But we certainly appreciate a few minutes of your time. And again, we'll do this every day through the remainder of this trial, which is expected to wrap up over the next couple of weeks. Just a couple of the reminders: if you're new to this case and you want to learn a bit more about it, we've got an 11-part podcast called Blame, the Fear, All These Years. That's on Apple Podcasts, also at 9news.com/blame. You can also text BLAME for continued updates on the case, and you just text BLAME over to 303-871-1491 for, again, those continued updates on this case. So Kevin, Nicole, we appreciate a few minutes of your time, and we'll see you again here tomorrow.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Chris.